Today I want to talk about some skater photos and specifically how I like to make my skater photos more visually appealing. Hope you like my new setup here. And also I want to remind you that I have a new Lightroom preset collection. Please feel free to check it out if you would like to do so. Let's talk about these photos. So most of these photos were taken at the Venice Beach skate park. And I want to talk about a couple of different terms. One is subject, and specifically the action of the subject. 2 is light. 3 is background. 4 is this concept that there is a small number of pleasing positions that you will find your subjects in when it comes to taking photos of action sports in general, let alone skateboarding. There are a majority of positions that you may not necessarily want them to be in. Most of the time they're going to be in those positions, but what you're trying to do is look for the small number of positions that where everything comes together and it locks into place and it looks really awesome. Let's talk about these photos and I'll demonstrate that as well as any other things that we can demonstrate from these photos. You can see that we have a fellow moving through the bowl. I have a downward angle onto him as he moves through. We have an orange hat, which is a nice pop of color, and I like it because it breaks it up and gets away from a risk of the scene being too blue, too cool. So it's a really nice piece to have in there. Also, I love this thing coming out of his pocket here. I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's a handkerchief for if he falls and cries. But this is cool because it gives a sense of motion, of action. Just a little thing like that can really add a lot. I love this wave that's moving through. That is created through obviously the positioning of the sun, but also through the design of the bowl. So I think that's fun. What's so great about this skate park is it's a very interesting place with very talented people. And we have these interesting geometric shapes being made by the light. It can be sometimes a bit risky to have people looking off frame and moving off frame in your shot. But in this case, I think it works quite well. I think it's lovely and it's a guideline that can be broken. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it works very well. We have a nice long shadow, and in a lot of these photos we have nice long shadows to work with. So now we have this next photo, and it's the same guy or a different guy that stole his style. I mean, to the T. I mean, he's wearing the same hat to the sweater and the pants, board, all that stuff. I would imagine that would make the other person angry because, you know, we all want to be our own individual, and if people are just copying us, then people say it's the sincerest form of flattery, but I think it's the sincerest form of insult. So if that was the case, there should have been a fight. In this case, we have this guy coming through once again with the orange hat. We have the bowl once again making a curvy geometric shape. Very interesting environment, and the angle that I'm able to achieve here because of this bowl, I'm up high, they're down low. I love these downward angles. I think it makes things more pleasing. So we have him coming through. We have this implied sense of motion through the frame. And that's one of the cool things about shooting this bowl is that when they're moving, you can feel that they're moving through. And he is up on the edge and defying gravity a little bit. And so that helps you understand that he's probably moving through at a decent amount of speed. So all of those little things are senses that you can put in your photos to make them more engaging. I love his shadow here. Very nice. So on this one, we have another fellow. He is in a very wavy, almost like ocean type of environment. And we have a line waving through here, a leading line that leads you to him. And then we have... So once again, we have this implied sense of motion. We have a very nice positioning of his body. His foot's not doing something weird. His arm is separated from his body. Not that it has to be, but I think it's a nice little touch. We can see his face. He has nice light on his face. He's in a nice little bright pocket here, his head in particular. All of the geometry in this photo and the pleasant, pretty soft light, I think makes everything work together the way that it does. And then of course the centeredness of the subject. If there was somebody else in this frame, it's interesting to think about what that would do to the frame. Let's say there's 2 or 3 people in this frame with him. it would run the risk of pulling the attention away from him and cluttering the frame. But in this case, we have a very balanced and organized feeling photo. So next we have this one. This is a bit of a different type of photo than what I've been taking before, but we still have this low angle, right? Or, I'm sorry, high angle pointing down on the person coming through. And we have this person just almost touching the shadow, and this adds some tension to the photo, a feeling of tension. And I think that works quite well in this case. We have the shadow of the fellow once again, very nice. Lights coming from this side. Nice little point of light on him. And so all of this stuff, like where the light is in the sky, really makes a difference for how these photos are going to work. The shadows coming in really liven up the photo, make it more visually dynamic. So and maybe let's see, more contrastually dynamic. We have this guy in the foreground here, which is a point of context, right? So we get the sense that there's a guy standing here watching what's going on. Maybe he's watching his buddies go through, and he's being inspired by watching what they do. And there's definitely a hangout culture-ness to skating. And so to be able to capture not only the people doing the thing, the action thing, but to capture the people on the side who are spending time with each other, that is also something that is useful to capture in the skating world. So I love that I have his hand on the board here. He's nicely out of focus, and this guy's still clearly the subject, but he's present. And this illustrates something that I mentioned in my previous video, which is that if you have a subject and a sub-subject, if you will, and you're trying to get both of them in the frame, it creates this interesting dynamic where you start to frame things differently. They start to become more potentially exciting because you're not just working with the single subject and their environment, which is obviously perfectly fine. We're taking plenty of photos that way, but we're now introducing this other point of focus that we can utilize to create relationships between things, and we can cause the overall framing of the image to be more visually complex and contextual while still keeping the frame organized. And we also have a nice sense of depth here, which is always a nice thing. So let's scroll down to this one. So this one was taken in Salt Lake City, where I lived for a little while. And there was this big garage door with, I punched the wall with my pinky. Hold on, I have to go to the hospital. There was this big garage door with a bunch of colors and jazzy stuff on it, and I happened to come across this gaggle of skaters there one day. It was like 10 people, I think, and I just walked up and said, "Can I take some photos of you guys?" And skaters are very easy to take photos of. They're generally happy to have their photo taken, and if you say, "I'll send you the photos," that's even better. In this case, they were very happy to do it, and I just said, "Do your thing," and I stood around. And I think what happened here was I was pointing at this wall as the skaters were moving through, and I think they also noticed what I was doing and potentially tried to get in my frame as well. But so anyway, what happened is you have these skaters coming through in front of me and in front of this door and doing these tricks. And so this is a good example of that. And he's making this wild motion with his body, flailing motion, almost like an attack stance of some sort of bird or something, right? Who skateboards. When skaters skate, they flail their bodies wildly for split seconds at a time, and that's what's so cool about photography, is that you can freeze that. And so in this case, we have the board separated from the ground. We have the ground separate. We have the person separated from the board. Board separated from ground, person separated from board. And once again, we have this crazy motion. And so we also have in the background people making expressive motions with their bodies on the garage door. So it matches really well. And of course, we have these wild colors. So we have an interesting subject and a talented subject in one of those minority positions paired with an interesting, colorful background. And then we have some very nice light hitting the person in the background as well. So if we scroll down, different one, bit of a tighter shot here and tighter framing. And once again, we have this kind of wild motion interesting. Almost reminds me of like those iPod commercials where they were dancing. I would have loved to have this arm be separated from this arm, so we have some nice visual separation there, but that's okay. It still looks perfectly fine. Fingers in wild places. He's wearing AirPods. Look at that. He interestingly matches the background from a color standpoint. Like, I think this hat really does a lot. You have the blue and the red, which matches the background. I think that's nice. And then we have the board in an interesting place once again. Now, the last one, the board was completely upside down. Great place for a board to be. Looks really cool. We're defying gravity. And this one, it's, you know, mid-flip, and he's not touching the board. I don't remember if he landed this one or not, but he's not touching the board. There's clearly a trick happening here, and it seems to be going well thus far. If we scroll down, we have another example of an interesting subject, but the background in this case is not so exciting. It's just a general street background. It's not bad. It's not a bad background. I got him in this arch, which worked out well. But the background's not the star of this image, and so one of the things you can do if the background's not the star of an image is to focus in on the subject, is to tighten up on the subject. And in this case, I shot quite wide, got quite close, and got down on a lower angle than the subject, so that he went up, he looks a little bit higher. It's more dramatic. And in this case, once again, we have the board separated from the ground, the person separated from the board, really expressive pose. He's going over this little plant box here that seems to be only participating as maybe an ashtray at this point. I don't know what they were doing with this, but so I focused in on the subject, and that's a good way to compensate for if your background's not super exciting. So now we have this one. Now in this case, we have an interesting dynamic here because we do have a well-balanced photo, and we have a sort of triangular shape of the subject here. That's symmetrical. So we have, you know, the wheels and sides of the board, and then we have his head here. So it's you know, sort of like a triangle feel. We were looking at his back. It would have been really cool if this was like a straight on portrait. I mean, I think it could have almost been like magazine worthy or print worthy if he was flipped around and it was like a straight on portrait of him. But in this case, we're looking at his back. And one of the things that makes this photo more engaging, I think, is that the background is now taking over a bit more of the visual intrigue. We have these beautiful palm trees, and we have a sense of where he is. We have a good idea of where he probably is. And so the background is starting to compensate a little bit more where he is maybe not quite as interesting. Although it's, you know, it's not too bad. And then finally, I wanted to talk about this one. So this is a great example of how you don't always have to take photos of skaters skating. I mean, this last one's a good example of this as well, but there's a general culture in skating that can be captured of hanging out, just chilling, hanging loose. In this case, we have these people bopping around, going to, maybe going to their next skate spot. I have a group of 4. Now, I previously made a video about groups of 3s, and a group of 3 would have been fantastic here. And if they were nicely separated, perfect strides, oh yeah, let's go. But in this case, it's 4, totally fine. It's a guideline that can be broken. I still think it works fine here. We were in Moab, Utah here, if you're wondering, because this is a rather interesting environment, right? A rather, different environment than you might see a lot of skate photos in. And we have this slight peak here, sort of acting as a centerpiece for the photo. In the background, a secondary subject, if you will. And then we have these people, of course, in the foreground walking through. And you get a sense, this is like a full scene type of photo where everything is really important to tell the story of the photo. Everything's always kind of important to tell the story of the photo, but there's a balancing that, or an emphasis that happens where you either focus in on the subject, you focus in on the background, or you focus in on everything. And when you focus in on everything, you have to be careful because sometimes the photo gets very disorganized. But this strikes me as a bit more of an everything kind of photo because everything really helps tell the story with an equal amount of emphasis. And even we have these guys over here that are going to go ride some mountain bikes. And so you get this sense of this really active area. We're in a small town. So the whole photo comes together and tells a big collaborative story about what's going on. And once again, we get this sense of skaters hanging out and not just skaters doing super awesome, cool, superhuman type things. Sometimes you go and capture the action, right? You capture this, and then sometimes you go and you capture this. Both of them can tell a really interesting story, but you just have to think about how to organize your photo in a way that makes all of this come together and be visually intriguing. So I hope that helped. Kind of rambled through that one, but I think it was coherent and useful. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to engage below. There's a like button if you did like the video, and if you want to see more of my videos, there's a subscribe button. And once again, I have a new Lightroom preset collection if you want to check it out. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.